Welcome to another episode of the ActivateCX podcast, where we demystify and clarify the direction of CX. I'm Frank Rogers, your host, and I help brands grow with better CX, AI, and self-service. Today, we're talking to CX Master Michelle Brigman as we dive into breaking the customer silence with VOC. Let's go. Customer-centric businesses, which all businesses should be, require deep insights into the voice of customer to remain competitive. This is becoming increasingly more important with dynamic changes in buying behavior and expectations. In today's episode, we dive into why voice of customer is essential and how it can help businesses win in today's global marketplace. To address this subject properly, we bring in industry expert and fellow collaborator, Michelle Brigman. Michelle, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be here. You know, I can't wait to have this conversation with you because we always go fabulous places.
We do, and it's long overdue. And so let's get right into it. Often voice of customer is thought about, and you know this, in terms of feedback surveys, and perhaps maybe a step in the process of good customer service. And also how you get to things like CSAT and NPS. People are looking at these numbers, but it obviously goes far deeper. It requires cross-functional alignment, right? It needs to appear smartly in the right channel and touch points. That's a lot about messaging and positioning. And its data must have value in course correction, not just data for data's sake. We've talked about these subjects. But Michelle, you're an expert when it comes to voice of customer. Why is it so important to the organization to focus on this subject?
Love the question. I think I'm an expert only from the lens of, man, I've been through the trenches and I have all of the battle scars that have given me some wisdom to say, I didn't know enough, right? So I think I'm still in that journey. I'd love to be an expert and have all the answers. Not there yet, but I'm happy to share some of that. Some of those tough lessons with the audience that I've learned over the 20 plus years being in the industry and working for some really large global iconic brands across multiple industries. So voice of the customer, I think that, you think back to when a company gets started and it's there to solve a specific problem for a buyer. So everything is built around who's going to buy this and how do we appeal to that customer and how do we just offer a really good value prop so they can't say no. And we launch with that mindset. Then you come into a business, you grow, and suddenly the voices that become really loud are your shareholders, your boss, your finance guy. And the more voices that come in, customer begins to lose a seat at the table because they aren't visible and present throughout the entire, when all these decisions are made, right?
Correct.
And I also think that when we say voice of customer, it implies that voice means they have to tell us. And it goes so much further than that. I mean, you hit on it in your opening statements of it's the survey, right? But how often do you get a survey and they ask you, give us a score, but they don't get any other information? So great, we have a data point that we can show on the chart in that meeting, but it doesn't tell us anything to inform how we make the next decision.
Yes.
And I think it's important for us to remember that voice of the customer goes beyond what they say and has to include what they do. I mean, as an example, right? When you're dealing with your kids, your spouse, your employees, if you walked in and you saw someone looking really sad and maybe they didn't eat their dinner or they were missing work, you don't say, how are you doing? And when they go, everything's great, I'm fine. You don't say, well, that's all they said. You're watching their behaviors. And customers are giving us so many indicators through their behaviors that oftentimes companies are not paying attention to. So it's important because they're the ones that keep us in business. They're the ones that determine our revenue and our success. Yet we have to expand how we're thinking about their voice and look well beyond what they say to us.
Yeah, that's powerful because in some ways, as we start working with the customer and maybe as a senior executive, you lose perspective on the face of the customer. Your salespeople, your customer service people, they're dealing directly with those humans.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're on video calls. And so it's more visceral. So you're really talking about a lot of the things that fundamentally in the customer journey pop up as a tell.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Yes. Rage clicking, where you see a customer, if you're monitoring their behaviors, you can see them rage clicking, and that would be an indicator. But those are indicators that there's a problem. Listening to the elevated voice, if you're doing call recordings and quality, those are indicators. They don't have to say, and they don't have to wait till a survey. You see these things happening. And it's interesting because you were also leaning into a bit with that comment about bringing the customer to life. And I think one of the things that companies are challenged with as well is they speak about the customer as a data point, and customers aren't data points. That's so one of the things that can help you become more successful with this is speak about the customer by name. That can be very powerful. I even have a story early in my career where I was working for a big technology company, and we were making decisions because we were growing fast and we're seeing customer experience performance decline. And so we were invested in it. We were listening to customers, but it really hadn't started influencing some of our business decisions. And I was responsible for scheduling a strategy session with basically all of the executive leaders within the consumer business. And I needed to get them to feel something, because it's easy in business that you're making these decisions, again, based on metrics and data, but you also have to remember that people change because of emotion. And one of my colleagues, Amy Heiss, I'll give her a shout out. She's amazing. We started collaborating, and we created her idea, but we created this board game, and it was basically like a sorry game where it was real customer feedback on the board, positive and negative. And the executives that were in the room were responsible for the decisions that were being made that our customers were complaining about. And they were well-intentioned, they were great leaders, and they were making very logical decisions. But through the process of playing that game, they would read something and they'd say, are we really doing this? And by a third of the time through the game, they were all so emotionally fired up about what was happening, they couldn't play anymore. And the phone calls started ringing to go tell different leaders, we have to stop what we're doing. And wow. that was a major lesson for me that I continued throughout my career on how do you bring that customer to life so you're not thinking of them just as a data point, because the decision makers needed to understand the impact and the ramifications of those, again, well-intended logical decisions and what they could do for your business, which ultimately could result in churn, not just upset customers, but lost business, and being able to make that connection there.
That's powerful. I mean, that and fun, but and ironic but interestingly enough, when we're looking at the importance of voice of customer, we know that we've had a true paradigm shift in how business works and how people work coming out of the pandemic. Do you see voice of customer and the need for voice of customer being even more important today than it was 4 years ago?
Absolutely, because they are helping to tell us what we as a company need to do differently in order to meet them where they are. right? These are the things I need. To your point, their needs are changing. The way they want to do business is changing. So no longer can you just sit in the, your four walls with your colleagues and decide how do we want to work. You have to look at what those indicators are, what maybe the leading companies that are ahead of you in terms of innovation, in terms of the way they're servicing or supporting customers, what's working there, and then figure out how does that align and apply to the way my customers want to do business. And great ways to do that is by asking them, right? Engaging with them. And that doesn't have to be this highly expensive, complicated experience, because what I have learned over many years is oftentimes with survey design, we ask the questions that we as the company want to know. However, if you truly give your customer the microphone, they will tell you what they need. And now when you see tools like video feedback, where you can trigger a customer to say, leave us a video, they don't answer the question you ask. They will spend a lot of time telling you what you need to know. You just have to start listening. So it's a very different way of connecting and letting that customer preference, needs, wants inform what you do in the future.
So that's a good segue. So Michelle, as businesses strive to stay customer centric, the need to reboot or refresh their voice of customer initiatives becomes ever more critical. As we know, customer expectations are continually evolving. We've talked about that. Perhaps what worked in the past is not going to meet the demands of today's discerning customers who leave after one bad experience and don't tell you, customers who have little tolerance for a bad experience. And I know you're thinking like there's a question in there somewhere, right? And this is it. So how should customers approach this much needed reboot or refresh in light of these customer dynamics?
Absolutely. So, okay. Right now, you're looking at existing CX programs be defunded within organizations. And a lot of that has to do with it's not clear how it is connecting to the outcomes of the business. And this is a real struggle for CX leaders. And we can kind of talk a little bit more about that. However, I want to spend a second to just say, what have I seen as sort of indicators that maybe your program does need a refresh? So maybe you've got all this great technology, it's showing up, customer, charts and graphs are showing up in the meetings.
Right.
You have a signal. In the office, yeah. If you're in the office, there's a poster on the wall that says, we care about customers. It's in your mission statement. You see it everywhere, all these visual cues, yet you're not really seeing it influence how work is getting done. And a couple of things that could just sort of trigger you on, all right, maybe this needs a refresh is number one, you are churning customers, you're losing revenue. Something is going on within your business. It could be from COVID, how your customers shop now. I mean, there's a lot of factors, but the way you used to do business doesn't necessarily apply anymore. So if you start losing customers and you really don't truly understand why, voice of the customer is a great place to really think about, how do I refresh what I'm exploring, what information I'm gathering in order to better inform. I think the second thing is you could see an increase in customer complaints. You could see declines in like your ratings and reviews. Again, going back to customers are going to nudge you and tell you you're not getting this right. How are you using that information to then influence and inform the future? And then kind of another heavy third one I see is you have your technology in place, but you don't see engagement around that data and information. It's become a big paperweight or a chart or graph, but it's not actually informing anything. And I think that, from my own experience, just CX is most effective, like I said, when you're using what they do and what they say. So if surveys are your only source of insight, and you are not, and you are addressing things, pain that's already happened, so you're being reactive to what's going on, you really have to balance that with gaining insight and information to inform you what is happening now or begin to predict. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You just have to step outside of probably how you've traditionally done your work and what stakeholders you are working with in order to get you where you are around your CX strategy.
When you're working with clients, what percentage of them typically have a well-documented voice of customer strategy?
It's typically very ambiguous. It's more focused around the outcome metric, the number. So it's not necessarily built around, one of the things that this, right? You build around not the outcome, you drive accountability around the behaviors that are going to get you to the outcome. Because how many times have you delivered? Well, let's use the sales organization as an example. How many times have you worked with a salesperson that their close rate is great? They are bringing in the business. Customers do not renew. Customers complain because they were a heavy closer. So while their numbers look really good initially, the lifetime value and the value they bring and the cost of servicing and correcting all the things they didn't do well, does it really make it worth it? And oftentimes it doesn't. So you really have to look at the behaviors and play the long game in terms of measuring your success and not just the data point for the day, because you can so easily manipulate that. And then people are questioning like, well, our numbers going up, yet I'm not seeing the direct correlation to our business performance. And that is a shortfall, a downfall of narrow customer experience strategies.
When we started this discussion, you used the term wisdom, and that just kind of echoed loudly in that statement, because selecting the right KPI is as important as anything here in this process. And then really holding yourself in check to not engineer the outcome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you find that within side of the organizations that there is a heavy drive towards, let's understand the truth of this? Or is it like any other part of the organization, like you just mentioned, the sales part of the organization, where there are specific numbers already on the table that people need to hit? And so when they're hired into that position, because we want better NPS scores and we want better CSAT and help us get there. Maybe antithetical to what the true nature of this discovery should be?
Well, I think what you hit on is the answer could be yes for both, because this is where that company's culture comes into play. What do they really want to do here? Do they want to deliver the KPI and that's it? Because I've certainly worked with those organizations where I'm fighting the how and I'm really challenging the behaviors and the beliefs and the values of the company, the way to get there. And it has been, I just need the number, because the number means we get the bonus check, and I'm just playing the short game, quarter to quarter. So I think that's a struggle with a lot of CX professionals, because they want to, they really want to change that culture of the company, but the company doesn't have the appetite for that, really.
Yeah, there's down pressure.
Yes. And it's real. However, there are other scenarios where, yes, the company's like, okay, we really have to get this right. And I find that the younger, or if there's a heavy growth period, that a company just is in a different mindset. Like they're not, like I said in the very beginning, they're not yet so bogged down by the voice and influence of all of their stakeholders internally. They're they are really listening to what the customer is telling them that can shape how they do business. So then creating systems and processes and checkpoints and KPIs throughout the life cycle become more and more important because they want to verify the quality along the way. And let me bring it to life with like an example, right? Because this feels a little bit conceptual.
Right.
So as an example, so there was a situation with a financial services company that I worked with. And everything was mobilized around digital transformation. Like it was in the early digital transformation days.
Okay.
And and that was the priority for the company, right? We have to shift from a old school manual process to a digital process. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. However, what the outcome metric was, let's say downloads. Are we getting enough downloads?
Okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what was happening on the back end is you had customers who, yes, were doing the downloads, but you had a lot of them that were deleting it. So they weren't necessarily active users. And when that was brought forward in terms of, hey, they're not sticking yet, and here are the reasons why, there was zero appetite to talk about that KPI. The appetite was about how many downloads. And you think about what you were seeing in that space at the time, that was the KPI, right?
Right.
So you're shaking the trees in a way that maybe the company didn't have the appetite for at the time. Eventually, like with that particular situation, it sort of righted itself, right? As you started to realize, okay, that's not going to work long term, but it took a while to get there. So the CX leader coming in with that perspective was not really a welcomed voice, because in that scenario, you're kind of calling the baby ugly is how it's received. So how you show up and how you present information as a partner and collaborator versus, I'm going to shake my finger at you and reprimand what you're not doing for the customer becomes really more important if you are going to be successful.
So data insights or maybe lack thereof in many businesses is the number one obstacle to affecting change.
Yeah.
And you can't hit what you can't see. And maybe to juxtapose their strategies and tactics, one can always do some A/B testing. That's kind of a tactical response. But strategy is an entirely different subject.
Yeah.
It covers a series of subjects and micro strategies that you're going to apply to affect change. So how do you use customer data in your practice to shape voice of customer strategy?
I think you have to look at it from two lenses. One is gathering the data post-event, which most of us, that's the traditional way of doing it. But gathering the insights and information post-event to understand, well, how well did we do in the customer eyes? And this is bigger than just voice of the customer. I mean, again, we talked about like behavioral data earlier. This is where you have to be well integrated and connected with the cross-functional leaders and departments that have relevant data that, whenever you combine everyone's insights, it's much more powerful. So how do you work with those other departments and teams around understanding after something, how did we do, what did we learn, and how do we continuously improve? And then being able to use that history to then inform real-time and future business decisions. And so that is how I think influencing strategy can really be a very comprehensive and successful thing. And again, I'll share another story. Working at a financial services company, I led CX, and I hadn't been there very long. And I'm sitting in a meeting, and CX was important, and kind of what I talked about earlier, the charts and graphs. We were kicking off all the meetings talking about it, but I was always talking about what was happening in the rear view mirror, and there wasn't really a lot of engagement from the leadership team. And they didn't ask a lot of questions, or it would be a question like, oh, I see that 2 weeks ago, there was a spike in performance. What happened? Which would then scurry the team members to go do a bunch of analytics that, frankly, who cares at that point? It doesn't matter. It's in the past. Nobody's going to, but that's the cycle and behavior the team was in. It was explaining away the past. Then, and I was like, I've been doing this a long time. This is not working. Like, we're not driving change and influence. So sitting in those meetings, I would watch what did get everybody involved. And what got everybody involved was, as soon as the finance guy brought up the forecast for the quarter or the year, everybody talked about headwinds and tailwinds. Everybody was super engaged and active, right? That's where the momentum was. And and kind of also at that time, I had been doing, again, I was new. I was doing this road show with the leaders and talking to them. And one of my stakeholders, he ran the contact center. And I was talking to him, just trying to, where's CX with you? How do you use it? What's going on? And this was before everything was online and cloud-based. He literally pulls out of his briefcase one of those big, like 3-5-inch binders, and he drops it on the table and he starts thumbing through it. And it's just full of reports. And he's like, CX Michelle? He's like, see all this? I have no idea how my business is doing. I have all of these reports. I have no idea how my business is really doing. And he's like, CX report? Yeah, that's page 86. Great. It's in my book. I don't know anything. You help me figure that out. I'm listening. And that was kind of the gauntlet thrown. I'm listening to how I'm showing up in these meetings, which is all they were asking for. Like, I was doing everything right. And I'm like, this is going nowhere. So went back to the team and I'm like, all right, we are building a forecast for CX. We're going to put aside our priorities and we are going to build a forecast for CX. So how do we begin to predict? We built our model, and I started showing up with, it looked like the financial waterfall chart. Yes. Headwinds, tailwinds, current target, gap to goal, what's going on. And it was amazing. In a matter of months, what went from me getting no conversation aside from explain that blip 3 weeks ago became, wait a second. Before we make that next business decision, the COO would say, Michelle, what does the model say is going to happen to both our CSAT scores as well as we put a financial number in with it, the financial, and they would make different decisions. Did they always make a different decision? No. But I told them, I said, look, my job is to help give you enough information about customer impact and cost of servicing that you can make a more informed decision than you did before. So one example was we changed chat vendors. The deal was already done. Finance signed off, price, everything was right. And then we ran it through the model and we saw what the impact was going to be it was actually going to drive repeat calls because their resolution rates for that particular chat, it was a cheaper for the first, but it required many more interactions. So it was actually a more expensive choice. So they didn't do that one. And that was when it was like, oh, okay, that is how you can inform and drive strategy with the data. But that is a very different way of thinking than how traditional CX leaders are thinking. They're still stuck in the explaining away the past and not creating systems and processes to activate real time and inform future decisions and bring value and be invited to those conversations, because typically they're not.
That's very proactive. It's not reactive. And one thing I really like about it is that you correlated voice of the customer to financial data, which was at the forefront of where everyone was invested. And so now you had a language that was shared.
Which is a big gap today for, I think, so many CX leaders is they're talking in terms of, I'm going to call it the soft metrics, the SAT, the NPS. Organizations do not make major business decisions based on NPS and satisfaction. They make major business decisions based on financial impact. And you have got to look at how you can leverage what you're doing and the insights you have with what else is happening. What are those other data sources and teams that when you combine forces, it is so much more powerful. So rather than sticking, oftentimes CX sits in the contact center, sits in operations, and has no interaction with marketing, no interaction with procurement, no interaction with IT. You have got to break those barriers down and say, what is it that you know? Here's what I know. What could we know together that would inform what we're doing next as a company to hit our targets, our strategic priorities?
So you just really kind of unpacked a success story right there in terms of how to bring voice of customer into the organization where there's collaboration around that particular topic. But we know that there are a lot of barriers to success in voice of customer. And so the role can often be siloed in an organization, opposite to what you just shared. That constrains collaboration. Data collection tools could be wholly inadequate.
Yeah.
And leadership buy-in could be very spotty and with loose alignment even to broader strategic goals. To be sure, that was not part of the job description for the person when they took that job. But can you expand on then maybe the barriers you've experienced that you see when you're working with clients?
And you hit on a few of those. So I would say, well, I think you hit on a couple of those, Frank, because these are some of the top barriers that I have seen that keep a CX strategy from really influencing how work gets done within the company. And one is you are not aligned to the strategic priorities. And I do not mean NPS or CX. So what I mean by that is, what are the things that the company is rallying their resources and focus around? So I mentioned digital transformation is an example I gave earlier, right? So we needed, and that may look like kind of a subcategory under that, maybe active users on an app, right? That is an important metric. It's the sexy metric. It's what we want to do. We want to convert our customers. And oftentimes the CX leaders are working on what they think is important. So number one, you've got to prioritize your work to make sure that it is supporting that priority of active users on an app. How is what you're doing? And if it's not, then you probably need to be doing something different than what you're doing, because that again links you to the things that are most important for the company at that time. So link to that strategic priority. It's the cool, sexy stuff that's going on in the company. Instead of being over here on the periphery, you've got to be embedded and part of and a critical player into that. Number two, we've kind of talked about it as well, as not being able to prove financial impact, the value prop of CX. So moving the number to say, okay, well, our score's better, but you can't find any corresponding incremental revenue, or you can't find a corresponding reduction in the cost of servicing, then you are set up for a lot of risk in what you're doing. And and I think this is where so many of those CX organizations that have recently been impacted by, again, defunding, this is a critical reason why, is that you aren't gathering the right data and the connections that we talked about even earlier, the cross-functional connections, in order to demonstrate the linkage of why it's important. Another one is that I talked about this before, where you as a CX leader tend to be the bearer of bad news. So nobody, you've got the cooties, they don't want to mess with you. I always say, early in my career, I remember I would, my whole life was around customer service. And so to your point earlier, I hear all these bad news stories and I would get so I'd want to stand on my desk and stomp my feet and say, don't y'all care? Why does no one care? Why is this okay? So when I would show up to my stakeholders, the marketing team that put out a promo that the stores couldn't execute, that we said we were doing it, but you go into our stores and we're not doing it, I would get so fired up. So then I would go to those stakeholders and I was like, you realize your customers are so unhappy and you need to fix that. Well, who wants to work with me? Like, none of them wanted to work with me because I was, again, calling their baby ugly. And I had to learn that I want to advocate for the customer, and that's not it. I mean, it got so bad that there was one, I'll say it was a C-suite member, literally told his team, you avoid Michelle and her team like the plague, like avoid her because she's going to call us out on what we're doing wrong. And I had to really learn that 99% of the time they were nailing it. I was just getting so bogged down in the 1%. And when I could go to them with the, hey, you're doing amazing, you can do even better, and this is by how much, if we could address this pain point. And now it was like, oh, I'm here helping them win, instead of telling them that they're doing awful when in fact they weren't. So right. That is, I think that you can't be that bearer of bad news if you want to be able to influence and drive change.
Yeah, you have to be able to work through the organization. But I will say that my experience with you, and this is in the kindest way, is you are a bunker buster in terms of getting people past maybe outdated ideas, past this is how we've done it before, past we're having a challenge with another part of our company functionally, and we can't get past that particular leader. Like, you seem to have that ability to affect change across the organization.
So remember I said in the beginning, I have so many battle scars.
Yes.
Oh, I learned this the hard way. And it's awesome. I'm so grateful for that too, because I think that has really helped me understand the political and cultural dynamics that keep, I mean, we're talking CX here, but this is with anything, that keep people from being successful. So always learning to, how do I meet them where they are? Like, let's meet and agree here. And then let's talk about how to, because everybody wants to do better than where they are, right? So how can I help do the double click up to the next rung on the ladder and the next rung? And I'm not there as to shame. I am there to support and elevate, because in the role as CX leader, you are not the decision maker. You are an influencer, and you do not influence and get people to do something different unless you build an emotional connection, value, trust. You deliver what you say, and they feel like you are on their team. So I learned that if I can demonstrate that I am on their team first and know myself how that links to the customer and how I'm championing and advocating for them, I am much more likely to be successful than if I enter the conversation with the customer says this, because that I have found is a lot longer to get results, because they're not emotionally driven by the customer. They're emotionally driven by hitting their number and achieving what their targets are. So if I can enter and meet them in that place, knowing that what we're doing is I am bringing that customer lens to it and that customer influence. And then at the end, as we make progress or hit a single, then I am there to say, this is validating how this is great for the business, as well as how this is great for the customer. And here are the data points, financials, business impacts that prove it. So then I have given them a script, if you will, to talk about how they are helping customer experience at the company, which typically may not really be part of the vernacular. They may be showing, yes, this helps customer experience, but they don't have a tangible proof point. And this is giving them that tangible proof point, which is very valued and respected.
When you go in to consult with a company, do you find typically that the voice of customer team or person has that level of agency, or has taken that level of agency to work across the organization so proactively?
Almost never. what I want to do, whatever I do when I come in, is I help give them, I'm going to say the script. And sort of the positioning is you're like an investigative journalist. You're not there at this point because you don't know enough. You know what you know in your little bubble, but you don't know enough about what's going on within the organization. So here is a template, script, questionnaire that you can go and meet with your key stakeholders, coming from a place of curiosity to seek understanding, not to tell them what you're doing. We're not there yet. We are just beginning to build relationship and then get lens of what's happening in their departments. And so that gets it started. And then you're thinking about, well, okay, well then what are your priorities? And then your job is to come back the next time you have that conversation with an insight you don't know, because you have information to help them. And in fact, I mean, this is a kind of a little different spin on it, but in one organization, there was the customer service department really was misusing another technology to be case management solution that they had. And so they could get the work done, but it was extremely inefficient. It was complicated. It took a lot of time for the agents in the contact center. And coming in, it's like, okay, there are so many better ways to do this, but often, right, there's no funds. There was no funding to do anything. So it was just an accepted, this is how we do business. It is what it is. No motivation to try to break through. Well, in this exercise, right, go talk to IT, because IT is making business investments in technology all the time. And what was interesting within IT is they were in the process of deploying a new ticket management system. And they were struggling with getting kind of excitement and buy-in from their stakeholders. And I said, okay, well, what in this system and technology, here's my business problem. What could I use, or what could we use in that contact center to help them solve this problem? That IT leader said, you know what? If I could get the customer service organization using this new module that this particular tech provider had, I have money to fund that. And if you will help me get more users on the new infrastructure, you're helping me. So let's work together. Well, that's what funded the new technology that they would have never gotten in the contact center before. But had those conversations not happened with, tell me what you're doing, what are you working on, what are the struggles, what are your priorities, what are you worried about? Like, just be interested in that investigative journal, investigative reporter hat to understand, and then step back and say, how can I help them be successful? Well, that was a beautiful relationship, right? A symbiotic relationship that came out of that. And you can have that with all of your stakeholders. I mean, I could go through many examples with marketing, with facilities, there are ways that people have something they're trying to do and they don't quite know exactly how they're going to get there and hit their numbers. And when you can come in and offer support, real support, magic happens. And that's how you start to break down those silos and disparate data sources and disparate teams. And you start coming together to solve one problem as an organization, instead of, well, that's somebody else's job or somebody else is working that. It becomes we are working together on this one thing, and we are going to be successful.
Yeah, Marcus Aurelius said that humanity was born for cooperation. And I think you exemplify that at the highest level and why you're successful. So I want to segue into a technological topic, because we've been really kind of unpacking approach and methods, not really tool sets. But I know that you have like a special skill and understanding of Medallia can help people get these subjects addressed, like the overall voice of customer subjects addressed with this technology. And so I'd like to understand a little bit more, like how you came into this specific knowledge, why you believe in this tool set, and how you use it to advocate for your voice of customer and loyalty stakeholders inside businesses.
Sure. So just to level set everybody, so Medallia is a customer experience management platform, right? It is a cloud-based solution that does everything from gathering feedback from customer, both from behavioral, voice, surveys, video, all the things, and then has a complex or a very a fabulous analytics capability that then can help inform, like I said, explain the past as well as inform the future. So I do not get anything from Medallia, but where's my love for Medallia? My love for Medallia is I was one of their best clients, 10-year client user. And I was also, then I joined the Medallia team for about 2.5 years, part of partner organizations, and then really helping with the pre-sales process for clients who were considering Medallia. And here's what makes me love this technology. If you are running a large, complex organization, its functionality, it will allow you to activate every single person within the organization to get actionable insights to inform business decisions. So that right there is why I loved it. I could have, I work for, again, large companies and franchised organizations, financial with many branches, technology, like all of these different, in all these different industries. And you are able to activate each user to where it can become part of just how their business gets done on a daily basis. So that's kind of my favorite reason, is the ability to handle the complexity. However, with that, is Medallia the right technology for everyone? No. And what especially if we talked about those organizations, they just kind of need a number and they need a little bit of feedback, then this may be too much, right? This is probably overkill. You don't have to have the Ferrari if you're not going to use it. So it has to be built on business case. Understanding whether it's Medallia or something else is really take the time to consider what it is. What's my intent? What does good look like? And what are all the elements that I need to consider to make sure that I am choosing the best technology?
Yeah, that's awesome. When we're working with clients to help them down select around a contact center, there's this proclivity to want to align around features and functionality. In some way feel that, yes, you've selected the right product, but it really comes down to physician, heal thyself. You need to know thyself. Yeah. And as a result, you need to be able to create user stories around how it is that you work to be able to define what your needs are. And not only what those needs are, but what problems they solve and where do they get you in terms of your overall goals and objectives. I think in our industry, the lowest common denominator is the user story.
Yes. And I like, for me, the roles that I love to consult companies on is I want to show up. You've got your technology and you're trying to figure out, we talked about earlier, like, it's not meeting my needs. It's not giving me what I expect, and less about are you asking the right questions? What's the survey design? It's more around activating your organization culture, because that's what I think, that has proven my success, and also delivering, industry award winning programs. And that is because, all right, you have something that you've invested in. Before you throw it out or before you don't use it, how about we really spend some time and see where's the breakdown in terms of how we've activated our organization? Are they aware of it? Do they understand how it can fit in helping them deliver even better services and products? How are you talking about it? What's the training? What's the communication? Are you paying attention to the behaviors that have them using it, and that you're holding them accountable there, and then celebrating all of these great wins? Because that's the other thing people, they neglect. They focus so much on, let me talk about all the problems. And every time voice of the customer comes up or experience comes up, it's always the bad stuff. And why aren't you celebrating more of the fun, good things? Because I guarantee you, if you really looked at your data, you have far more positive than you have negative, yet nobody talks about it. I even remember working with one, deploying an app to where, actually it was a Medallia app, deploying the Medallia app so stores could see their own feedback. literally watching a franchisee download it, pull up their data on their phone, start crying because they said, what? My field person, every time they come in, they're always talking about what didn't go well. And they were just scrolling through customers who were saying, naming their employees about how awesome they are and how good they are. And they're like, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you anymore. I've got to pick up the phone and call them and just say thank you. These were total blind spots within this organization. And that is what we do so often. We make customer experience and voice of the customer negative. And it needs to be elevated as something positive and exciting and things that people want to lean into instead of chasing them away. Like I said, I did earlier, you want to really focus and build all your programs around what's going well and the behaviors that resulted in those positive.
Perhaps it's a byproduct of management by exception, and thus obfuscating this overwhelming preponderance of like good things that are happening that you could celebrate. You want to focus and damp down the items that are the exceptions. Wonderful. Well, you've really, I think, shed some light on the importance of voice of customer. You've taken it far afield of the survey and connected it to the rest of the organization in a way that I think probably is like the optimum outcome that people would want from voice of customer, but don't know how to get there. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights today.
Thank you so much. I loved being here, and I'm looking forward to, what's next, Frank.
Indeed. Businesses can leverage the power of voice of customer to identify new opportunities, enhance customer experience, increase loyalty, and drive sustainable growth. It's much more than a survey, and it clearly takes coordination, leadership support, and the steady hand of experts who can navigate business silos, people like Michelle Brigman. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Please remember to like and subscribe down below. And remember, if you want to be successful, let's go get it.